according to an account. Anecdotal means we don't know for sure that it happened, but it was shared and reshared so many times that more than likely it did. A lady asked Benjamin Franklin on the last day of the Constitutional Convention, this is back in 1787, and she asked him this question, well, doctor, what have we got? A republic or a monarchy? And his answer was very simple, a republic if you can keep it. A republic is what we have, but you're going to have to fight for it. You're going to have to struggle to make sure you don't forget. And if I can add something to that, it would be this. We better keep it because that is the only option we have for a nation like this. And this morning, as we are doing something different, my purpose in stepping away from the regular series and talking about this is because there have been voices in the past several decades. There have been voices challenging the foundation of our nation, challenging the validity of our Constitution. Based on my research and based on my understanding, our founding fathers were not naive, neither were they outmoded and out of fashion. When they laid the foundation of our nation, they knew what they were doing. They were wise in setting forth a system of government that is unlike any on earth and has ever been. And it is worth preserving it. It is worth protecting these United States. So if you have your Bibles with you, go ahead and turn to Acts chapter 21, verses 1, 2, and maybe 3. And the main point of our message is this. If you truly understand our nation's biblical foundation and the work our founding fathers put into it, we will understand, appreciate, preserve, and protect it. When you truly understand what happened, we have to stand for our freedoms. We have to recognize God's providential hand upon this nation. And we have to pray for revival in America. Do you believe that? Acts chapter 21, verse 1 and 2. It says, now it came to pass that when we had departed from them and set sail, running a straight course, we came to Kos. Kos was a little small city. The following day to Rhodes, and from there to Patara. I want you to notice that word because we're going to come back to it. And finding a ship sailing over to Phoenicia, we went aboard and set sail. Now, most of us read past that name Patara and we do not think much about it. But this little town was a very important city of Lycia. Lycia was in southwestern Anatolia, which is the southern part of Turkey. So if you look at this map for a moment, this may help you a little bit. This is modern day Turkey over here. This is Israel. Over here is Greece. Further over there is Rome. Lycia is right here. Patara, the city we just talked about a few moments ago, Paul came here, got on the ship. Patara is sitting just right here on the coast, maybe 10 miles or so from Xanthos, even less. Not very far from another place that has nothing to do with our message, but I love to point out. And that is a little place over here called Myra. Myra was the place where St. Nicholas was the pastor. Who are we talking about here, folks? Santa Claus. He was born and raised in Patara, and then he went to Myra as the bishop. So when people ask me, have you been to the North Pole? I have. It's not in the north. It is sitting on the southern coast of Turkey. Nobody asked me that. But anyways, it made a great point. So sitting here is Santa Claus's home. So it was a great thing for me just to be able to go. But it's much more than that. This place, the Lycian region, had their own language. They had their own culture going back to the Hittite times in the second millennium BC. So we're talking about 1400 BC. 1400 years before the coming of Christ, there were these people called the Lycians who lived under the Taurus Mountains and right on the beautiful turquoise coast. Wonderful people. And they had their own language, they had their own culture. And one historian said it this way: they were locked away in their mountainous country, and they had a fierce love of freedom and independence. These people had a fierce love of their freedom and their independence. Something else it says here about them. He said, and they resisted strongly all attempts at outside domination. So let's back up here for a moment. These Lycians, living here for at least 1200 BC, they had a fierce love for freedom and independence. And we're not going to let anybody control us or tell us how to live. Nobody's going to dominate us. Something else this historian says about them is that they were the last in Asia Minor to be incorporated as a province in the Roman Empire. So many empires and kingdoms came, but they could not completely subjugate the Lycians. The Persians came from all the way here, and they came and they conquered Asia Minor, they conquered Lycia, and Lycia was under Persian rule, but they could never break their spirit. They were always free. The Greeks with Alexander the Great, they also came and conquered Lycia. In fact, Alexander the Great came to Patara 300 years before Christ, but they could never break the Lycians. Oh, we'll be under your rule, but we're free. Later, the Ptolemies came from Egypt. Remember, Alexander the Great's generals, they came and they also tried to conquer Lycia, but Lycians were always free. The Romans came as well, and they understood, we can control these people, but only so much. You cannot dominate the Lycians. Now, I'm trying to explain to you something very, very important. These people, somebody said it this way, they were like the Swiss. If you know anything about the Swiss, they're hardworking, they're prosperous, they're neutral, very independent, loyal to their traditions. The reason for my sharing this is that a major attribute of Americans is our spirit of freedom. A major DNA of what makes Americans Americans is that we love our freedom, we love our liberty, we love our independence. I've been living in this nation now for 30 years. I grew up in India. I spent the first years of my life going to school, going to college, 17 some years. But then I came to America, and I can tell you this much, America has changed. America has changed. Especially in the past few years, it is shocking to me how Americans have so readily given away their freedoms to somebody else. You tell me how to live. We're going to give away our liberty. Remember the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness? We have given those away. And we are okay with other people telling us how to live. As an outsider, I can tell you there's a big difference that has come in the past 30 years, especially in the past few years. My question to you is, what in the world is wrong with you folks? Why would you do that? Hey, wait, it gets even worse. Nobody's saying it's not a real sickness. Nobody's saying that the virus is not real. What I'm saying to you is this: how quickly we became submitted. How quickly we began to get on to other people and say, you need to submit, and you need to submit. And this is not a fundamental American virtue. And it may come as a shock to you because you're not used to hearing these things. So you're okay with what went on, and you're fine. But here's the problem. The DNA has changed. Our nation was found on this virtue called liberty, that I'm going to worship according to the dictates of my conscience, that I'm free. You can't tell me how to live. I'm free. I'm not harming other people. I'm abiding the laws. I'm a law-abiding citizen. Having said that, I'm free. The Lycians The people who lived in this little region, even though with time they gave up their language, they took on Greek as their language, nonetheless, they always had this fierce sense of freedom, independence. I was shocked a couple of years ago when churches came under attack and people began to tell you how to live, and even Christians, blows my mind, how they began to police each other. I was like, wait, what's going on? Why would you be doing that? It's shocking how naive many Christians were and still are. Now, what does it have to do with our message today? Historians are not sure about the exact time, but about 200 BC, these Lycians and many others came up with a system of government known as a league or a confederation. It was known as the federation, by the way, very quickly. I'm going to give you a very dense definition, and then I'm going to look like the hero and give you a very simple one. You okay with that? So I'm going to give you a very complicated definition from the textbook, and then I'm going to look great. Yeah, you're not supposed to laugh. It's the humor. Anyway, that also makes us free. Anyway, here's the definition of a federation. Okay, or federalism is a design to unite a multitude of state entities whose powers and prerogatives are safeguarded in the course of integration. Let me repeat that again. It is a design to unite, to bring together a multitude of state entities whose powers and prerogatives are safeguarded in the course of integration. Put it simpler is here, collective action with local autonomy. We're going to come together, but you will be free. You will have your individual freedoms. We're going to bring these cities together. Back in those days, if you look at that map once again, there were thousands of city-states, the polis, all over the place. These are cities. It's like Raleigh would be its own country. Durham would be its own country. Henderson would be its own country. Oxford would be its own country. So these were city-states. But what they would do is they would come together in a league, in a confederation. Why would they do that? Well, think about it. For trade purposes. We grow corn, you know how to make baskets. I'm being very simplistic. So let's trade. I can come over there with an army and take over all your baskets, but then you're just gonna move. Would you still stay there knowing that these people are gonna come and rob you and pillage and bully you? No, you're just gonna move. So let's not do that. Let's come together in a confederation, in a league, and have certain rules in how we're gonna operate. Also, when it comes to travel, when you are part of a confederation, there is protection. So somebody from the city of Myra, if he were to travel down the road towards Patara and somebody were to rob him, hey, the people from Patara will say, they're under our protection because we are in the same league. So you can't touch them. For protection purposes, something else. It also protected them against other kingdoms and empires that were trying to come over. Now, if a certain city says, we don't want to be part of your confederation, we don't want to be part of your league, okay. Well, when the Romans come, when the Persians come, don't come calling to us. Now they're going to fight you and you have to fight them. But if you're part of the federation, we're all going to come together to protect you. Are y'all getting this? Why this federation of these leagues? So there was the Achaean League, the Peloponnesian League, the Lycian League. These were all these different leagues. The most advanced of them was the Lycian League. In the Lycian League, there were 23 cities in their region. Each had a representative, and they had what's known as a proportional representative government. Proportional means this. If you're a big city, you get 3 representatives. If you're medium-sized, 2. If you're small, just 1. But proportional, meaning If you're putting a lot of money into the federation, you have more votes. If you're a smaller one, Henderson would probably get 1 vote. Raleigh would have been 2. But if you go to Atlanta, man, they definitely get 3 votes. 3 representatives show up at this council. What do they do at the council? You elect judges, you elect magistrates of all the towns in the league. They met in various cities, but the chief one was Patara. They would meet in what is known as a bulletarion. Kind of looks like the U.S. House of Representatives. Have you seen the U.S. House? It's like laid out like this, and up in the front you'll have the speaker or whatever, and so it's laid out in the same way. They would discuss laws. They would talk about taxes. The laws were applicable to every individual in every city in the Federation. Now here's something. People are still ruling, but they're ruling through their representatives. What would happen if all of us showed up in Washington, D.C. and tried to vote? I mean, that would be crazy, wouldn't it? I mean, that would be mob rule. Whoever is stronger, whoever can break glass, whoever can set things on fire, they win the day. But when you pick your representatives, you pick people who have understanding. You pick people who have knowledge, who understand law. You pick people who can sit down as gentlemen and discuss issues. It's not like, well, my view is right. Cause what? Cause. You can't do that. You got to have some reasons why you're right. When it comes to making deals, hey, listen, you guys, you're damming up that water over there, but it's really hurting our farmers. So please give us some water, and in turn, we will allow you access to the shipyards, to the harbor. Let's make a deal. So these representatives would come together and talk to each other, and they would make deals. So this is what the Lycians were doing. This is very important. I know some of y'all are wondering, where in the world is he going with this? When it came to the writing of our nation's constitution, where do you think the founding fathers got their information? Number one, they got it from the Bible. Somebody went back and did some research, and they found 1/3 of all the quotations in the discussions regarding the Constitution, Revolutionary War, pre-Revolutionary War, was coming from the Bible. In fact, one book was quoted more than anyone else, which is the book of Deuteronomy. Why do you think the book of Deuteronomy was quoted so much? Because this led to the foundation of the people of Israel. So the founding fathers, like Thomas Jefferson, my favorite, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay, John Hancock, all these people, they were studying this book. This was the foundation. At least 1/3 of the quotations are coming from the Bible. But then next to the Bible, these people were also studying, what were they studying? Enlightenment writers. Enlightenment was that time when people in Europe began to study classical authors like Livy, Polybius, Strabo. They began to study them and go, wow, we didn't know that the cities were organized this way. We didn't know how they had representatives come together and they had these 2 chambers and how they would argue their cases and how they would make decisions. Wow. So these Enlightenment writers like Whig writers and English common law like William Blackstone. How many of y'all have been to Blackstone, Virginia? Did you know it's named after William Blackstone, an English jurist? Reading these guys as they are studying classical writers and trying to understand the history of the world and how the Greeks or the Lycians organized themselves. And they're studying things like, how can we limit the government? We cannot have a big government. We got to limit this. We have to have separation of powers. How many of y'all remember that from back in school days? Separation of powers. What are the three? Legislative. What's the second one? Judicial. Billy pretty much answered for everybody. You have three. Why three? So that no one entity will control everybody else. Checks and balances. There's a system there to make sure nobody abuses power. Rule of law. We are a nation of laws. Due process. Like in the Old West, if somebody was a criminal, hang them. No, if a good sheriff would say, no, we're not going to hang him, he is going to go before the judge or the magistrate, and we're going to give them a due process. These founding fathers were studying and seeing how we can have representative government and civic virtue and social orders. And of course, they got many of those things from the Bible, but also from all these writings. Names like Montesquieu and John Locke and William Blackstone. When it came time to ratify our nation's constitution, 10 years have gone by since the Revolutionary War. We got to have a constitution. The world was watching. England was watching. King George is watching. Oh, you won the war against us. Now let's see what you're going to do. Are you going to be able to make yourself into a nation? You think that's so easy, huh? We'll see. This is called the ratification of the Constitution. And so they are trying to convince all those 13 colonies, how can we come together? How can each state be properly represented? How can we have a system of checks and balances? And in doing that, they wrote what is known as the Federalist Papers. How many of y'all here have ever come across the Federalist Papers? Some hands are going up, all right? Some hands are going up across the room. None over here? Oh my goodness, okay. Some of them must have lied. But anyways, just kidding, y'all knew. From October 1787 to August 1788, a series of 85 texts were published in the New York newspapers. We call them the Federalist Papers. They were written by men like James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, smart men, and they were trying to make a case. Not every state is going to get just equal representative. We got to make sure that they represent the size of the states. They represent the population area. We got to make sure we have proper checks and balances. So they wrote and they were arguing and making their case. And guess where these men turned to? At least 4 times that we know, they turned to what's known as the Lycian League. That phrase, Lycian League, or the name Lycian League, is mentioned about 4 times in the Federalist Papers, in papers 9, 16, and 45. 4 times it's mentioned in these 3 papers. And what they're saying is, we have a precedent. What is a precedent? Somebody has done this before. We have a lawyer here, so I gotta be careful how I don't want to cross the line. We want to make sure that we're not creating something that hasn't happened before. We're going to create something that has a precedent. So they look to the Lycian League to guide them in creating this proportional representative government. Wouldn't that be wonderful if we could go back in time and see the place where the Lycian League met? Wouldn't that be great? To just stand there and say, this little place in Patara inspired our founding fathers. It inspired the ratification of the Constitution. Wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great? Amen. 5 people, bunch of communists. Wouldn't that be great? Yes. All right, we'll turn to the screen. We're inside the Lycian League's Parliament building, which is in Patara, and this is kind of reconstructed.
And as it was back in those days, there were 13 rows of stone seats arranged in a semicircle. So if you can see, this is a semicircle right here, kind of like the chambers in the US House of Congress. A lysiarch, who functioned as the league's president, presided from his stone podium. So up here, where he would be, and the league had 23 city-states as members. Depending on the city's size, it sent 1 to 3 representatives to the league's meetings at the Bouleuterion in Patara, and that's where we are in Patara. This representative form of governing likewise influenced the configuration of the voting districts for the US House of Representatives. So the Lycian League served as an inspiration for the framers of the American Constitution. I want to read what Alexander Hamilton said in the Federalist Papers. This is number 16. He said, "Of all the confederacies of antiquity, which history has handed down to us, the Lycian and Achaean leagues, as far as there remains vestiges of them, appear to have been most free from the fetters of that mistaken principle, and were accordingly those which have best deserved and have most liberally received the applauding suffrages of political writers." So right here, along with the Bible, was the foundation of the United States of America and how we operate today. James Madison in Federalist Paper 45 also wrote that in the Achaean League, it is probable that the federal head had a degree and species of power, which gave it a considerable likeness to the government framed by the convention. The Lycian Confederacy, as far as its principles and form are transmitted, must have borne a still greater analogy to it. Yet history does not inform us that either of them ever degenerated or tended to be degenerate into one consolidated government. On the contrary, we know that the ruin of one of them proceeded from the incapacity of the federal authority to prevent the dissensions and finally the disunion of the subordinate authorities. Here, Alexander Hamilton wrote that in the Lycian Confederacy, which consisted of 23 cities or republics, the largest were entitled to 3 votes in the Common Council, those of the middle class to 2, and the smallest to 1. The Common Council had the appointment of all the judges and magistrates of the respective cities. This was certainly the most delicate species of interference in their internal administration, for if there be anything that seems exclusively appropriate to the local jurisdictions, it is the appointment of their own officers. Yet Montesquieu, speaking of this association, says, "Were I to give a model of an excellent confederate republic, it would be that of Lycia." And that's where we are, in Lycia, where the Lycian League was founded.
The itinerary, they said we can't go there. I was really disappointed. This was the place where Christians were first called Christians. And then they told me that they added Patara, and I was like in the heavens. I said, man, I get to go and stand in this place that inspired the foundation, the Constitution, the laws, the Federalist Papers, those things that give us the right to have the freedoms we do as Americans. I said, great, I want to go there. I want to stand there. In fact, if you notice, none of the tourists are there because they moved on. They had no clue. I'm like, Nicole, forget about all that stuff. Let's stay here. I want to film this because I want people to see. You see, in America, history is being rewritten. It's being rewritten. And it's being presented as if these men were so out of touch that they didn't understand how to build a country, so now we have to do it. Folks, I want to tell you, those men knew what they were doing. Not only many of them were steeped in this Bible, but they understood history. They went back and researched and read the best of the best and understood they didn't stop at the Lycian League. They even went on to the Romans because the whole idea of a Senate is coming from the Roman side of things. I mean, they worked their tails off to create a system that will not only benefit them. By the way, many of them were not that benefited. They lost a lot. Do y'all know your history? Many of them lost a lot. But they built a system that will benefit someone like me who came, who loves independence, who loves liberty, who loves freedom. and to come to this nation and to have the benefits we do. The founding fathers built this system. The U.S. House of Government has those two houses, bicameral, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The Senate, of course, as you know, 100, 2 for each 50 states, and the House of Representatives, 435. Different purposes, and yet it was done in a way where the monarchy, the aristocracy, and democracy coming together. Did y'all get that? How in the world did they understand? We got to bring these three different ways of doing things. The monarchy, where there is this one person, okay, president. The aristocracy, we got to have senator. The democracy, people are going to elect their House of Representatives people and send them in every 2 years. And they get to introduce these bills. How did they figure that out? Brilliant. And yet there are people today on TikTok and social media and in classes, some of our university and college classes, I think they're more Marxist and socialist than anything else. I would suggest to them, why don't you go to those countries and see how bankrupt they are and how plagued with violence they are? You want to make us that? You see, the truth will set us free. We have to go back, and it was very challenging. I don't want to preach this. It's like I'm in a college class. I don't want to preach this, but your freedoms depend upon them. Your children's freedoms depend upon them. So we need to know these things and know how we got them and how precious they are and how well worth protecting they are. I can go on and on. What is our responsibility? Number one, when it comes to freedom, stand for freedom. Fight for freedom. We have given away freedom so readily in the past couple of years, it is shameful. And by the way, we can work with any country anywhere in the world, having known that we as Americans should always be aware there is going to be envy. They envy this system. They envy the American people. How in the world do these people who look so different from different ethnic backgrounds, how can they work together? We do because someone way back there understood how to build the foundation of this nation, built on biblical values and then built on the best in history. Freedom. You know what Paul says in Galatians 5:1, stand fast, therefore, in the liberty by which Christ has made us free, and do not be entangled again with the yoke of bondage. So anytime someone says, we have to take your rights, you stand up and say, no. That is the fundamental DNA of this system, and it's working. Don't give up our freedoms. Something else. Understand providence, believe in God's hand upon these United States. You know, when you look at how this nation was built, it is not supposed to work. Some colonies out there on the other side of the pond, how in the world can they work? They're all selfish, self-centered. How can they work? It's God's providence, God's hand upon this nation. We were in Boston last week. A week before, visiting our daughter and our son-in-law, and I said, I want to go by the Boston Harbor. Anybody remember what happened at the Boston Harbor? Yeah. What happened? The Tea Party. What did they do at the Tea Party? They dumped tea into the harbor. Why? Because there is no taxation without. Well, good. I mean, this is an educated bunch here. But I also told our kids, I said, I want to go to the place where the massacre took place. How many of y'all know what I'm talking about? The Boston Massacre. And I went there, March 5th, 1770. People stood against the oppression and said, we're going to die here. You're going to have to kill us because we're not leaving. If we could time travel and bring those people back today and say, meet the new Americans who so readily give up their freedoms, they'd just be shaking their head going, my goodness, we died for you guys? What's wrong with you? This is what took place. God's providence, meaning understanding that God's hand is upon America. And I'm not saying for a moment that this nation is perfect. I don't want to worship America. Are y'all with me on that? I don't want to worship America. But I do want to say, Psalm 33, verse 12, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people he has chosen as his own inheritance. We recognize our foundation. We recognize the providence and the hand of God upon our nation. But lastly is this, revival. We need to pray for revival. What is revival? Revival is when God begins to work in the hearts and the lives of his people, where the saved come back to him and then they go out and win the lost. You want to know what the hope is for America? More than just this and this, it is revival. 2 Chronicles chapter 7:14 says, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. Question, do you understand the blessings of living in this nation? It is not a perfect nation, but it is built on a solid foundation, first of the Word of God, but then also of the best in history, like the Lycian League. Do you pray for our nation's leaders? Do you thank those in uniform, those in the military who sometimes even give the ultimate sacrifice so that we can have the freedoms that we do? They pay the price so that we can go out there and march. We can go out there and fight. So we can go out there and protest. This is what is done. Are you praying for revival for our nation? Are you praying that this nation will come back to God? And are you saved? What does that mean? All of us are born in the bondage of sin. We're born slaves to sin. And it's when you come to Jesus Christ that you are set free. If today you've never given your heart to Jesus Christ, you may be free. You're going to watch the fireworks and you may go to the beach or the lake or whatever and celebrate, but you are still in chains. And you have to be set free. And the way to be set free is to ask Jesus Christ to be your Savior and your King. And freedom comes in. And then to understand the nation in which we live, how blessed we are. And then to understand how our founding fathers sacrificed and worked so hard to give us this Constitution, to give us a system of government unlike any other in the world. And we take it for granted. Somebody from the outside like me has to come and say, man, you got a good system. Don't let people take it away. Don't let the government take it away. Fight for it, stand fast in the liberty by which Christ has set us free. Pray for revival. Share the gospel. The biggest thing you can do for people is not say, man, we live in a great nation. No, is say, you can come to know the living true God through Jesus Christ.